ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country, around the world, around the cyber universe. Things are getting heated up in America. A lot of folks are moving attention away from things happening overseas, but our enemies are not turning their eyes. They're still focused on America. They're still hitting us in ways we don't see. And before we all celebrate Memorial Day and VC Day and everything else, I thought it was a perfect time to bring back a very popular previous guest and just one of my favorite people in the universe. The great and powerful Molly Mckew is back on Independent Americans. How are you, my friend?
Should I have the big glowing Oz head like in front of me?
So
I'm doing good.
You should, because I think if Malcolm Nance is kind of what does he call himself? Nanstradamus, right? You're an oracle too. You're kind of like a more like almost like a fortune teller. Like you kind of know what's coming, and you've predicted many things, including the recent pipeline attack and other things that I want to get into. Your star has been continuing to rise. You continue to be more involved in the national and international discussion. But it looks like, I'm going to go back to where are you and how are you? It looks like you still have the same cool samurai sword behind you.
I do still have the sword.
You're not in Russia. Where are you and how are you?
I'm still in DC, in the house, awaiting travel again. Which will probably start happening again at some point this summer, I guess. But I don't know. We'll see. I'm okay. Weird times, right? Like this is just a super weird time for the country, and I think our alliances and the world. And I wouldn't say it's playing out the way I want right now, but we'll see. We'll see. I have lots of trepidation about where we are in a whole variety of respects, but I know you do too, about different things happening in the country. So.
Well, I'm glad you're here to help guide us through it. I was on my friend Pete Dominic's show this week, and we've been talking about the pandemic and where we are. And I shared with him something I've been talking through with my therapist, who actually put a real name on it that I think encapsulated where I was. I feel depleted, and I think a lot of us may feel depleted. We feel jubilant about the coming Memorial Day and the summer and the masks off, but it's kind of like after combat, like the adrenaline's gone, and maybe we're gonna do some part, but I'm just tired, and I think we're all really tired. But that underscores even more why we need to be vigilant right now, because I think our adversaries and enemies are hoping we're tired. They're hoping we're not paying attention. You are paying attention. I want to get to many of those things, but you were also apparently paying attention to our last episode and my conversation with Wes Chatham from The Expanse. So you are a fan of The Expanse, yes?
Absolutely. I mean, who isn't this? If you're not a fan of The Expanse, it's actually because you haven't watched it and don't really know. But no, it's great. It's a great show. I'm glad that Amazon kind of picked it up and has carried it on after Sci-Fi ditched it. Because it was the best show since Battlestar Galactica, the greatest show of all time, that Sci-Fi Channel did, and I was sad that they weren't going to continue it. But anyway, the books are fantastic, and you should read the books if you haven't. All folk listening to this, but I think the show is a very faithful adaptation of what the books tried to represent. Obviously, you're going to miss a lot of the detail in a show versus a 400-page book, but I think the show has really hit its stride, especially in the most recent seasons. And there's just so much going on there, and the Wes Chatham character is like everybody's favorite, so it was great that you had him on.
Before that show dropped, I told my wife, I said, a lot of people are going to be like, who's Wes Chatham? Do I know this guy? But people who watch The Expanse are going to go, holy shit, you got Amos? And that's been the reaction, right? Expanse fans have been over the moon about the fact that because
he's so great, and in like real life is so great, and as a character. And it's so funny because in the book he's everybody's favorite, but he's very different in the book versus the representation. And this was like my big beef with the show when it first launched, was none of the characters looked like what they were described in the book. And you're like, that's not what these people look like. And it takes you a while to sort of drop that and just appreciate the show as a show based on these concepts. But he has done such a great job with that role and what the role was supposed to be, and like everything that he has done with it personally. And it's just like, it's one of the best sort of representations in a sci-fi show ever. I think everybody loves him. So Yeah, really good. It's good that you had him.
Well, I'm glad you're happy. I know sci-fi fans are happy. So if, for fans of The Expanse, we talked about the Rocinante, and if we were on the Rocinante and Amos was there, maybe you're Naomi Nagata. I don't know. I don't want to stare, but I don't know.
I don't know that I'm that cool is the thing.
But the person who's kind of seeing things before they happen, bringing things together, but maybe interpreting the landscape for everyone, and you've been doing that. So I want to go back. You joined us, I think it was November 5th. It was right after the election. The results hadn't been formally declared. Everybody was on edge, but you predicted some things. And Chris, our amazing creative director and my partner and everything, reminded me of all these things. And he said, last time you warned us about supply chain attacks, and a couple months later, we found out about two of the worst hackings ever, and SolarWinds. So SolarWinds went on for like 8-9 months. Damage still happening. Can you explain to people what it is, why it matters, and where we are now in relation to that attack or attacks specifically?
I mean, in the most basic, non-specific terms, the supply chain hack being, subcontractor to a great big piece of software had a malicious piece of malware in it that was then integrated into the software update for this great big piece of security software that lots of people use. So everybody downloaded it as part of their updates, and it just sort of sat there as a potential backdoor to systems in a very wide range of companies, government agencies, etc., for a long time. And it seems like only a small number of those were sort of accessed or exploited, but it was a very clever way, using everybody's lazy security and vetting protocols, essentially, to get a really significant piece of code into a bunch of different systems where a lot of important information was accessed. And it's just, I think the response to it has been sort of, it was like explosive, and then everybody stopped talking about it, and there's sort of like a new recent thing of sanctions, and like none of it. I mean, I think it's a warning of what we'll see more of. And I think, that was, the SolarWinds thing has been linked to Russia, to Russian intelligence specifically. There was also the Microsoft Exchange server hacks, which are Chinese backed. And I think we need to understand, I think we do understand, but we need to be more aggressive about understanding how significant the cyber domain is as a arena of conflict in the modern era. And not just as, not just seeing it as attacks, but as intelligence gathering, as all these different aspects, that we still seem to have a slow, reactive set of tools to respond to. Although there's been a lot done, especially with, as we have discussed before, General Nakasone at CyberCom, there's been a lot done to change how we're viewing this and the posture that we're on in responding to this kind of, to identifying and responding to these types of attacks and infiltrations. But I still think we don't have the same mindset as our adversaries in terms of the importance of this. I think on cyber, we're closer than we are on the whole information domain. But it's just, every one of the different service branches views cyber stuff as like an add-on to their specific thing, right? So how does cyber relate to land warfare? How does cyber relate to stuff that's flying around in the sky if you're the Air Force? And they're not seeing it as an entirely separate domain, where I think we just need to be much more adept at what we're going to be fielding.
So it's been often said that the army is built to fight the last war, not the next war, right? So when I went into Iraq, we were built to fight, the Russians in Eastern Europe, right? In a tank war, right? And then we had an insurgency, and now, we're still talking about Afghanistan and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and the threats seem to be domestic extremism. There's conflict areas like the Arctic that nobody's tracking on. We've now got Space Command, and
whatever
maybe
that's doing.
Right, but maybe cyber should have been the thing elevated rather than space. But regardless of the elevation of the agencies, the threats are real, and I think coming more close to home in ways that people feel. So it feels like it's a new threat environment, and the Army and all the other agencies are not really fully staffed up and ready to engage and vigilant up in public policy. And the public is definitely not, you're kind of like screaming, hey, bin Laden's going to hit us. Bin Laden's going to hit us before bin Laden hit us. And we now find out DHS and other private companies said there was a pretty significant attempt around the end of Trump's time and around the election. Do we know any more about that? There are many, just like in terrorism, maybe, Molly, right? We'll never know how many attacks they stopped, right? How many shoe bombers never got on the plane? How many car bombers never hit a school? We'll never know, right? But we have a sense now that there was a pretty significant attempt around the election, the end of the Trump administration, right?
Yeah, I think the details remain sort of sketchy. I think kind of on purpose. I think we knew in what was sort of publicly presented from government agencies at the time during the election that there were pretty significant efforts by various Russian agencies to do stuff to us again. And the Chinese and the Iranians were also sort of tinkering around with things, but not nearly at the same level and not nearly for the same purpose or objectives. And I'm sure there were other things happening too. This is clearly a space, especially on the sort of information and influence side. This is clearly an area where a lot of different adversarial powers are going to get in and try to figure out how to use it to their advantage. But I think that the Russian stuff remains the most sophisticated and integrated, not because of any technical capability that they have beyond others, but because of the sort of the centralization of what they're doing. So when we see these little information attacks or pieces of information operations, it's like the tip of an iceberg of money, other people who are involved in like on ground influence efforts, people who are doing the work. And it's that sort of coordination and integration of effort that really sets it apart from so far what we're seeing from other countries in terms of overt objectives to increase the potential for conflict within American society. And I think that's the thing that we still don't pay enough attention to. It's not about Trump. It's not about some other candidate. It's not about supporting or not liking it. It's creating conflict within the American society so we set ourselves on fire, which we seem quite happy doing right now. And that, I think, is the part that where I really feel we have not learned anything in the last 5 years because we're still setting ourselves on fire and in potentially accelerating ways. And so it's a little frustrating to watch.
Yeah. And I think, even 20 years ago, bin Laden would have loved to have had 500,000 Americans dead from a virus, an insurrection in the Capitol, riots in the streets, close to race wars in some communities, right? Like this is bin Laden's big dream, is where we are now or where we were in January. And maybe we're pulling it back. But I feel like similarly, people didn't take, the overseas extremist threat seriously until 9/11 happened. They didn't take the domestic extremism threat seriously until the Capitol attack happened. Did we not take it the cyber attack seriously until this latest pipeline attack? Because I want you to help break that down, because now it feels like this one maybe people felt, right? Because it's gas prices, which is like this like Achilles heel of Americans, where we drive these massive cars and think we can drive forever for free, right? Like this is hitting America where it hurts. You want to really fuck them up? Mess with the gas lines, right? And so you got the Colonial pipeline attack, which happened by this, again, another, perfectly from Central Casting named group called Dark Side, right? Tell us what happened. What happened? And is it still happening? Like the earlier SolarWinds attack? Is this ransomware still sitting on people's computers, just waiting for dumb Johnny to hit download? And what does it mean for a new battlefield in this country?
It's interesting what you said about the fighting the last wars. Our enemies would have wanted XYZ, and because it used to be we would be attacked or something, and then we would do something about it, right? And really, starting in 2016, that hasn't been the case, right? Like we had this big attack, and it was like, oh no, that didn't happen. No, Russia didn't do. No, it didn't matter. It didn't matter at all. Like none of it influenced anything, right? So we spent 4 years playing that game. And then there's like all this, but like now, like our thing, like the January 6th didn't happen for half the country. Okay, maybe a third of the country, but half of the elected officials. And this is just, it's this bananas cuckoo bird universe where we are now explaining that threats against us are not threats against us in ways that are so stupid and unhelpful. I just don't know why we spend time doing this instead of actually doing anything about it. And the pipeline thing is such an interesting example. So the Colonial pipeline ransomware attack, it's this gigantic petroleum products pipeline that transports multiple things, including jet fuel and heating oil and gasoline up most of the eastern seaboard in the United States. That was hit by a ransomware attack. I don't know that I've seen concrete evidence yet on how, like, if it was a dumb phishing scam or if it was something more sophisticated, how it got into the system. But essentially it got into administrative systems of this pipeline, the billing system specifically, and so they had to shut down everything IT related that ran the pipeline because they were worried. They say they were worried about the ransomware sort of bleeding into other systems. So a piece of, essentially, the way this thing has worked is the group DarkSide that is responsible for the ransomware called itself, as it has now announced it has disbanded, which no one believes. It'll just rename itself something else. But ransomware as service, essentially. So they build the thing, and then someone else, a different hacker group or whatever, provides the access into the system where the ransomware is used, and everybody splits the profits and goes home happy. And as part of this, usually the ransomware is embedded in the system. They exfiltrate a lot of data, and then by the time they make the ransom demand of the company, they're sort of the two-tiered threat, like, oh, your systems don't work because we've encrypted them and blah blah blah, you have to pay us to get them back. In this case, they paid the ransom, and the de-encryption tool didn't work, which is awesome. And then the secondary threat is, oh, and by the way, we have all this data, and if you don't pay us, we'll sell it online for more money, and it will screw up your stock prices and everything else. So it's like this very dark space, criminally new thing. But just as an example, what the sort of the tracking of the Bitcoin wallets of these guys in the last couple of weeks, the DarkSide group branded as that, I think, in August 2020. So it's been operating less than a year as this group, and in that time has made $90 million off of their ransomware partnerships. I think of that they get 17 million or 15 million or something, and the rest goes to the partners. But it's just this whole construct of, we have built this thing and anyone can use. So who are the anyones? And then we have no idea in this case what was the affiliate that was using the ransomware, that was the hacking partner in the ransomware effort.
Does that mean it could have been the Russians? It could have been anyone?
Well, so the DarkSide guys at least partially operate out of Russia, as the Biden administration said very clearly in their various statements. They have not gone so far as to say they think this was Russian backed, I mean, in terms of the state, but they expect the Russian government to do something about these guys operating out of their territory. But it's this question, there's still no information, and we probably won't know unless it gets leaked to someone, about the affiliate in this attack. But it's so easy for, there's a lot of these different ransomware groups, right, that sort of offer a service to people. And it's super simple for any intelligence service, terrorist group, whatever, to set up a little group of dudes and become the sort of partner for this attack. So we won't know unless we get more from our intelligence agencies about this question. But could it have been Russian intelligence? Sure, absolutely. And
so can I pull apart a piece of that? Because I think you really pulled out something really important. For 4 years plus, we didn't acknowledge an attack, and we didn't counterattack, right? So the Russians, in my view, didn't meddle in our election. They attacked our election, in my view,
Absolutely.
Right? In my view, it was an act of war. But we had a president who said, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Putin's my friend. It didn't happen, right? While it kept happening, right? So we've got that element. And then secondly, America didn't used to negotiate with terrorists. Now apparently we do. And we pay ransoms because that company paid DarkSide $5 million, right?
$4.4 million.
Which means open season. It's going to be similar to the war on terror in that it doesn't have to be a state agency. It doesn't have to be a nation state. It can be a bunch of dudes with some weapons. And so once you start saying you're not going to hit back and your back door is wide open and we're going to pay and we got a lot more money, it's going to be open season, right? Every dude with a laptop's going to try to take a shot at a company in America and go through and just, you really pull this apart. They went into the billing system to threaten to shut off the pipeline. Right. So like they weren't separated like they should have been. And maybe, you know, it was exaggerated. You know better than I do.
Well, and
the whole thing feels like, the whole thing feels like it's open season. It feels like they're going to start flying, especially if Trump had still been reelected. It would truly be open season. But I'm sure Biden and others are hardening it. But the public message is, hey, attack American companies, attack American assets. They'll pay you. Right.
Well, so the interesting question is, would this attack have happened if Trump had been reelected, or is it now for a reason, right? And I have many questions about that I will not conspiracize about. But there's a lot of different things with this particular, and like I think these ransomware groups and hacking groups in general, you know, they really do a good job of exploiting this sort of hacker mystique, anti-establishment. We're actually Robin Hood and everybody else is bad, evil billionaires. And so they, in this one, they like in particular really leaned into it. And they're like, oh, we didn't mean to disrupt society. Like we were just trying to make money as fucking criminals. Like, okay. And now we will no longer use ransomware attacks against healthcare systems, hospitals, which they've been doing, by the way. I mean, so like the idea that these people are noble and good is just like nonsense. They're not noble or good, and this is all criminal activity. And I don't care if you don't like companies or disagree with petroleum industry in general. This is not the way to try to deal with any of this. As I think we saw, we will be the ones paying the price. But I think this thing was so interesting in so many respects. One, it has now come out, you know, company was hit by this ransomware attack. And by that evening, so 12 hours later, had already paid the ransom. Because whatever they were being asked for, which I think worked out to about $4.4 million of Bitcoin that day, it's way less than disrupted profits. Like they don't even care about that much money. It's a
rounding
company.
error. Yeah.
Right. And hackers know this, right? So they're like, whatever. And I think of the average ransoms, there was something like on this particular group, about half the people hit by the ransomware paid. The average ransom was like 1.9 million. So these things are escalating a lot. It used to be like $100,000. There's been 40-ish ransomware attacks against states or municipalities in the United States in the last year or so, which basically they've all paid to get their stuff back. And it's gone from being like $100,000 to like $300,000 is the average now. So this stuff it's escalating because people realize, you know, the more that's known about these types of attacks, everybody understands how disruptive it is. So the people conducting them are asking for more money because everybody's just paying to like make the pain stop, right? And it's interesting because it like the private sector here is really the soft underbelly, because it's not, if it was the government, there'd be some big moralistic, like, oh, we will not pay the rent. But like the companies, most of the time they don't make the stuff public. They just do it and move on and hope nobody knows. In this case, they had to because it was massively publicly disruptive, but most of the companies don't. Paying
it's kind of like if I make it go away
faster.
Yeah, go ahead. Molly, there are parallels here, right? It's kind of like how companies used to deal with sexual harassment claims, right? Just pay it, shut up, go away. Let's keep it out of the press. We don't want to let everybody know this happened, right? And then on the other side, it feels like, I don't know, Mexican kidnappings, right? Like the market is good, and as long as there's money to be made, people are gonna keep doing this. So I feel like we're moving toward a new normal where our underbelly is exposed. So like, talk us through, if you can. So how does this work? Does the head of this pipeline get an email from like in the movies from anonymous, from an emoticon that's like, pay me $4 million or I shut your shit down? And then does the CEO have to even call the White House? Does Biden even know they paid this? Or can all that happen without any government authority or intervention whatsoever?
Normally, the answer is yes, it can happen with the government not knowing anything about it. I think the new executive order that that President Biden signed addresses some of this in they are trying to encourage private sector entities to report this type of stuff to the government in sort of more effective ways. Because if you don't know it's happening, there's no way to sort of really engage or prevent any of it in the future. And so trying to encourage a reporting environment is really important. And so that is significant. And I hope they can encourage. I think the creation of these new agencies, in particular, CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, blah, 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 thing that's part of DHS, which is sort of meant to be this civilian-facing interaction thing, because they have sort of shown up when there's these crises and helped companies and whatever. I think they are doing a good job of building trust between government and private sector on, like, if cyber shit happens, you know, who are you going to call? It's the CISA Ghostbusters, right? And so I think more of that is happening. In this case, they had to, because if they had not disclosed to the Department of Energy, in particular, that this was going to happen, I think they would have been in deep shit. So they did, and they did say this was happening. I don't know that I would say the early part of the government response to this was adequate in terms of what they were saying to the public. I certainly think that the states involved, maybe 2 of the governors did an okay job. I think Republicans seem like DeSantis was leaning on this. His state wasn't affected at all, but his statements about this sort of like drove gas panic in Florida, in my opinion. I think in general, it showed like the stuff we kept seeing during COVID, right? This like total lack of resilience in American society, and how easy it is to disrupt our supply chains in general, whether it be groceries or gasoline, apparently. I think all of this shows we have a lot of work to do in terms of all of those aspects of civilian resilience in this country. But there's like a lot of gaps in the cyber attack sort of response system, right? In terms of, do you just call a private sector thing like everybody calls something like FireEye, a company that will come in and sort of tell you what happened and how to fix it, and help you do an internal plan if you're a company in terms of what to do next? Is that something the government should be more involved in? Should there be the equivalent of like a cyber FEMA team that is immediately deployed to help clean up these messes? I think there's a good case to be made that the answer is yes, absolutely. And not that it should be a service the government is providing for free or anything, but like, and there'll be huge debates because like, obviously this is a massive private sector moneymaker for a lot of other companies. But the government needs to be involved in how we clean this stuff up, and how we're monitoring it, and how we are engaged in this. Because there's a reason these attacks are targeting primarily American and European companies, and that they never hit Ukraine or Russia or Kazakhstan, for example. Like, they're targeting us with this stuff because it's not independent guys. And they keep paying. And if these companies keep paying, these people are going to keep doing this stuff. So there's like a whole range of issues in there that we have not adequately addressed yet.
So it feels like, Molly, we're in this new frontier where we're talking about national security imperatives, right? Shutting down gas pipelines, disrupting good order and discipline and like the workings of society. So the government has a role to play in keeping Americans and American interests safe. Is it a new frontier where our military has to kind of guide these and protect these technology interests in the same way our Navy used to guard oil tankers? Right? Like, they have to be out there in front and overhead. And, you know, if you're flying the American flag, you're an American asset and we're going to protect you. And that leads me to the next question, which is, you've been predicting the future accurately, and you've been sounding the alarm. You've been vigilant when many others haven't. What's next? When I talk to you 6 months from now, what are we going to be talking about that happened?
That's a question. So I think on the first one, there's still this issue of sort of borders and authorities, right? Where particularly in the ephemeral cyber and information domains, there isn't a hard border. So this isn't like, so yes, the government should absolutely be playing a role in a military and intelligence aspect in defending those borders, of watching attacks that are coming into the United States, of watching the types of ransomware and sort of different hacking efforts that are targeting American companies and American citizens. Yes, absolutely. There should be a new concept of how this is happening in the sort of intelligence and military lane. there just needs to be a lot more like sort of the law enforcement aspect in there too, which just it gets really cloudy in terms of who is where and how this works, in a way that then becomes super unhelpful for everybody trying to interact with the government on these issues. So a lot needs to happen to sort of clean up the space, make it much clearer. I think it's happening, like it's getting better. But this idea of like, what is the virtual border we defend of America needs to be very clearly defined for our companies, for ourselves. And I think a lot more work can be done to sort of make this very clear in our doctrine too, like just like how we are approaching this and who's responsible for doing it. A big piece of it can be civilian, like DHS has a huge role here and needs to have that role. But it needs to be integrated to the potential resources that are external facing, which will be military and intelligence. So I think there's a lot to be done there still. On the what next piece, there's so many questions there. I think that the question is going to be, as these different types of attacks continue on, I think this one is very eerie to me because thus far it has been a deniable attribution thing, right? Like it's kind of Russia, but nobody's going to say it's Russia or like Russian, whatever. Like it's just sort of some guys doing some things. So in terms of what's the response, like, okay, it kind of seems like the group disbanded because they were afraid of being targeted for retaliation, which is wise, obviously. But I think in terms of the what next, we'll see more of these deniable attribution attacks. And I think in this case, this sort of echoes what we've seen in recent years, where it wasn't like the super hardened thing that was targeted, like the pipeline itself wasn't like exploded or shut down. It was like a peripheral secondary system that was probably the least secure piece of all of their IT architecture, right? And I think people who infiltrate systems understand this, that there's like the thing the company cares about, and then there's like their email and all these other things that they don't care about very much. And that's exactly what we've seen in more recent sort of hack or infiltration efforts relating to like nuclear plants, right? Where they're not getting into like the reactor software and like making it explode, but they are getting into administrative systems and security things and stuff like that, which can disrupt functionality in a whole variety of different ways. So I think there's just these layers of things. Like there's the deniable attribution, getting around the edges of stuff in weird ways, like the non-critical systems, and understanding how those can shut down critical systems. And in this case, this did feel like it was timed now for a reason. And maybe it's a part of other things we haven't gotten a lot of exposure on or clarity on yet. But I think we'll see more of these types of infrastructure targeted cyber things at critical moments in political decisions in countries, in sort of what's happening to disrupt the direction of decision making. I think we'll see more of this. To me, this felt very targeted to now in terms of new administration, trying to impact the perceptions of recovery. It very quickly became a conservative talking point about how bad the Biden administration is. And like now it's like Iran again, like the gas embargo, the oil embargo times. Like there's gas station lines and it's crisis everywhere. And, none of that was real. It was all sort of created by panic and inflammatory behavior. But it did disrupt a lot and had an economic impact. Ironically, the company will make more money now because gas prices have gone up so much. Right. But I think that's what we'll see is sort of like there will always be random things happening at random times. But I think there will be more things that we will start to look at and wonder the most important question, which is always why this, why now? And I feel like we're going to see more of that related to election cycles, to decision-making cycles, to economic cycles, to influence markets, to influence sort of big economic swings in systems and countries. There's just going to be more of that, and there's no way around it.
So, disruption is the goal, right? Chaos is the goal of all our enemies, right? And why now? Like, I don't know if it's a cause, if it was timed around this, but we've got a lot of other things happening too. You've got a huge percentage of our government that doesn't recognize a domestic attack on our capital. You've got Israel exploding right now in Gaza, which could unfold into a major regional conflict we haven't seen in decades or longer. You've got a new administration in place, and our enemies will wish us harm as we also pull out of Afghanistan, right? Yep. So it looks like we're trying. I think Biden is smartly trying to solidify our homeland and get our house in order as the rest of the world in some ways continues to burn, to include with the pandemic. And I've tried to highlight the fact that, for example, putting out vaccine in third world countries is probably going to be much more effective than putting Marines on the ground, right? And that whole landscape is unfolding at a time when our political system is still fragile. And I wanted to come back to something that you launched, or you were a part of, with Evan Mcmullin. We had Evan Mcmullin on this show when we first rebranded it. He was the independent candidate for president. I appreciate a lot of what he's been adding to the national discussion. And he launched a new effort. We don't know what the hell is going to happen to the Republican Party, right? So he's part of a new group that you signed on to. I want to get the name right because it's a tough one, right? It's a call for American renewal. Right. And it's a wide range of people. I've been critical of it. I mean, but at the same time, I appreciate it. And here's what I said. I said, look, it's nice to see people that are trying to move the Republican Party back to sanity. And it has to start somewhere. But for me, it just didn't feel like enough firepower. No offense to you. You're a great voice. No. I want you on there, but I know you're an independent.
Anybody's big gun, absolutely.
Right? And when bigger, unexpected Republicans break ranks and join the effort, then I think it's really going to get my attention. But right now, there wasn't really a name on there that was unexpected. I mean, you're on there with people like Scaramucci and others that aren't exactly going to drive the future of Republican politics or independent politics. And that's maybe what I wanted to ask you to give me your thoughts on, because I don't think the future of independent politics and a strong independent third party or multiple parties is going to be led by someone who is a longtime Republican. And there's a growing wave of independents in this country that want new leaders. And they don't just want the old leaders wearing new uniforms, which is what that effort felt like. Now that said, I wrote this on Twitter, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And if people are bound to calling themselves Republicans and they have an alternative other than the current zombie GOP, then that's a good thing for Americans, right? If you can peel off some people away from crazy land and bring them back to sanity, that's a good thing. And anything that takes away from Trump's power, in my view, is a good thing for all Americans. But what did you hope this will achieve? Why did you sign on? And what do you want the message to be that people take away from this new effort?
Yeah, I mean, look, I signed on because I was asked to, because I'm on the board of the Stand Up Republic Foundation, which is connected to some of these efforts to sort of work in these spaces and find the new commonality and blah, blah, blah. And what's on the paper is great. Like, these are all principles that any actual American who's not microparsing things for political conspiracies should agree to, in terms of defending freedom of speech, defending all these other things. So what's on the paper is great, and I agree with all of that. And I signed on with reluctance, not for any of the what's on the paper or who's attached or any of that stuff, but because I am not a domestic political. All I want to do is go do my foreign stuff again. And I hate that I have to spend so much attention to what's happening here because everything is a firestorm all the time. But it's not. Despite my own discomfort with being a political person in the United States, it is not a time to sit on the sidelines, as we have discussed. It's the man in the arena situation, but this was something I could put my name on, and I believe that those things, like the stuff on the paper, is good. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done for all the reasons you mentioned, which is all current elected political folk are super reluctant to do anything that will alienate even their shitty parties when they admit that it's shitty, for fundraising reasons, for whatever other reasons. There's this huge fear in every elected political person of pissing off whatever the party is. I think this is doubly true in Republican candidates in the country. especially right now where, stepping outside the lines is like death threats and craziness, and not just like you lose the funding and the support and someone will primary you, but like your family is probably going to be at risk. I'm disappointed that actors from either side, and in the case of this effort, I do think there needs to be a lot more focus on making it this alternate space for everybody who doesn't have a political home, which is something I know you're really focused on too. And it's not just Republicans who no longer have a home. There's a lot of Democrats who do not like the direction of some of the more extreme stuff in the party, and really just want somewhere else to have something to say politically, where there's no choice anymore. Like, if you're a moderate Democrat, you may be used to vote Republican, but you're not right now. Like, that's not going to happen. So what else is there in terms of showing what you actually believe and where you want to see? So I think this effort in particular needs to show that there is a space where they can have influence, whatever that might be, city council elections, a single national seat, whatever. Where's the space where you can have influence in building this new consensus between all the people who feel they have no political home? And I think a lot of work has to be done there. I think in terms of where are the names of the big, elected officials, like why was there no one signed on? I think it shows this fear, right? This true fear of like stepping outside of the place that you're comfortable in. But right now, everybody needs to ask why they're so comfortable in a system that is completely shitty. And if you don't think the system is completely shitty, you're actually like not paying any attention to what's happening in this country or how we've gotten here or what's going on. And like, I think the Biden administration on domestic stuff has put forward a lot of ideas that fundamentally are about, whether you agree with them or not, fundamentally are about transforming the way the government interacts with citizens and what government is now bringing to citizens' lives in a new modern age, right? And I think that's so critical. And there's such a case to be made. And I say this as a person who grew up in Idaho and believes government has like no role in your life, right? In this modern era of all these things we've talked about, these like gray zone attacks and like all these other things, right? Strength in society that will come from things like providing healthcare, like having real retirement plans for people, defense in the information domain, so we're not all being driven crazy by what we see online. All of this sort of gray zone resilience, which has to come from government, is defense now. It is national security now. And so we like this whole idea of like anti-big government thinking needs to be transformed in the modern era to something less stupid, because it's just stupid now. And again, I say this as a person who fundamentally is libertarian-ish, but not in the party sense in this country. In how I view government, there's a lot of stuff government should not be doing. But this is what our adversaries are doing. And it shouldn't be my job as an individual citizen of this country to defend myself from some fucking attack from China. Like, the fucking government should be doing that for me. And that now looks as a very different thing than it used to. And I just think we need to understand that, to embrace what in the current, like, wouldn't it be nice if we lived in the future, Expanse universe or Star Trek universe where it's a global government and everybody's happy and living on basic or whatever? But that's not where we are. We're still in a country, or in a world of nation states. And like, what is my nation state doing for me to defend me from the shit that's happening in this global competition between democracy and authoritarian systems? And so I think in all of that, which is how I boil it down to, I now have to give a shit about domestic politics. We need more people showing what that's going to look like. And I think if this little piece of paper that I signed on to can at least inspire people to think about what's the alternative space, can start raising money, which is what you're going to need to convince some people to take a risk, to step outside their comfort zone. Hopefully it'll move in that direction. It's really challenging because the money, as you know, is huge and vast for disruptive, malign, toxic political actors of all varieties. And when the free money and the free fame come from being insane and not from being normal, it's a really challenging political environment in this country to get normal people who actually want to do things like lawmaking elected to lawmaker jobs. It's really frustrating. It's just like such a bad landscape of things to have to change. But
But you're up for it. But you're up for it. And this is why I wanted to have
I don't
you
know
on.
that I am, friend.
I think
don't know that
I think people who are listening think that you are, and I think part of why I wanted to kind of wrap it back together with this discussion is because I still think how we govern and how we defend our shores and how we take care of each other is kind of central to the future of this country.
Absolutely.
And we need structures and institutions, and we need political processes, and we need media companies and others that are independent, but we also need leaders. And I think, seeing your name on there gives me an opportunity to talk about it and gives me an opportunity to elevate your voice. And I think, frankly, you are the future of independent politics much more than Evan Mcmullin or somebody that's been in the game before. The people who are coming in now because the moment demands it, or they're coming up and frankly, they haven't been contaminated by the party affiliations in the past or their allegiances or their donors. There's a changing of the guard happening in politics in America. And I don't think it's just within the parties. I think it's also voices like yours, and it's your voice specifically, which is so critical. So I appreciate your explanation of that.
That's
and
a lot of
you
pressure.
guys had stuff like civic responsibility, ethical government, rule of law, truth, right? Like we actually have to create a document where we say, hey, we all agree on truth, right? But the leaders are ultimately, in my view, what are going to create movements and followers. And I think you have created that. You and I are working on some stuff. So listeners, stay tuned. I want to do all I can to work with Molly to push these ideas and elevate her voice and bring more of her genius and fighting spirit, because it's really, really important. Tell me I have two last questions for you, but the one is, what does your coffee cup mean? Can you read your coffee cup for people who are listening and tell them what it means?
So it says Gerasimov is just the latest version of the doctrine. And if you have lived in Russia sphere internet for the last 4 years, you will note there's constant mimetic debates about this thing called the Gerasimov doctrine or Gerasimov theory or Gerasimov papers. Gerasimov is the equivalent of the Russian Joint Chiefs of head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who is the guy who wrote a paper about all this hybrid warfare stuff that we now have to talk about all the time. And there's a really dumb, stupid debate that has been conjured from the ephemera about whether it is doctrine or whether it was Gerasimov thinking out loud about stuff that America did in the Arab Spring or whatever. And this stupid debate has been created as an attempt to say, so nothing Russia does actually matters. But where it's I don't give a shit if the Gerasimov doctrine is a doctrine or not. This is absolutely the fucking way that Russia fights wars now. And anybody who's trying to argue otherwise is just blowing smoke up your ass. So I made these mugs for my class. It's my hybrid warfare class that have the Gerasimov stuff on them as a joke, because of course they had to read it and read all the debate about the stupid, is it a doctrine or not stuff. And the point of the whole class is I don't give a shit if it's the doctrine or not. It's certainly not on the Kremlin's website, but it is what they are doing to all of us now. So
it's not stupid, and it's and like any good joke, there's truth in it, right? And there was an saying.
I will let you know that more than one of these has been in the White House on desks. So
I like that. I mean, there's a saying I learned in the military that just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not trying to kill you, right? Which is maybe a good reminder for this entire new landscape of modern warfare that you have artfully laid out for us. I have a final question, which is a fun one. You have to choose. There is no middle ground. Waffles or pancakes?
Waffles, 100%.
Why?
They're more versatile as a vehicle for things, right? I do like pancakes. Do not get me wrong. A good pancake. But I will also specify I like American pancakes. And if you start going to Europe where they have things called pancakes that are really like a sad crepe, and you're ooh, no, that's not what I wanted, right? You just want the flapjack American. This was created to keep frontiersmen full, you just want that. But that's not what you're getting most places. I do like pancakes a lot, but waffles so much because they're crispy and you can put stuff on them. They're good with bacon. They're good with fried chicken. They're good with fruit. And I will say it probably comes from, when I was little, I grew up in Idaho as a not wealthy kid. And my family went through some rough financial times, and we lived fun, interesting lives in Idaho as not wealthy people. But every summer we would go visit my mom's parents who lived in Cincinnati and were very much like people who had the country club membership and would go to brunch at the country club and golf with their friends, right? And this was like, it was like traveling back in time to like Victorian England and like the grandparents' house on this hill overlooking a lake. And I loved them dearly, right? But it was like walking into a different universe. But we would go to brunch at the club, and it would, it was like the real brunch, like the omelet bar with the guy, the butler guy, like making the omelets for you. And there was the Belgian waffle bar, which was the first time, of course, I'd ever had a Belgian waffle. But they would make you the fresh waffle, and you could put on the strawberries and the whipped cream or the whatever the hell else you wanted. And this was like for kids, heaven. Like
that's it.
There's a dude making me waffles and putting stuff on top, and it's a lot of sugar, and nobody's judging me. Like this was magic. So yeah, I think it's probably related to that. Like the specialness. The specialness of the waffles. Yeah.
I knew that answer would not disappoint. The specialness.
And there's a story. There's always a story.
The specialness of Molly Mckew continues to be as timely, important, and inspiring as ever. So I thank you for the work you've been doing. I'm going to send you our Independent Americans coffee mugs, which are actually camping mugs.
So I love
they'd
those.
Be great
That's good.
On the frontier, anywhere else. I'm going to get you a whole bunch of gear. We got new gear. Folks can find it at independentamericans.us. Lots of gear, right, for independent Americans. I sent you peeps already, or I need to send you peeps, but I didn't send them before. I've sent you some more Uncle Nearest whiskey.
Fabulous.
But most of all, my thanks. You have been defender.
Do you want a mug? You can have a mug.
I do. Let's trade mugs.
I'll send you a mug. I'll totally trade you a mug.
We'll trade mugs. But more folks, stay tuned for more to come from Molly Mckew in the days and weeks ahead. I am honored to have you as a friend. I'm just grateful for all you're doing. When folks are out there partying.
Ditto.
And having their post-COVID, celebrations, you're out there holding the line and watching shit for the rest of us. So thank you for being on the line.
No pressure.
I look forward to having waffles with you sometime soon. Stay vigilant, my friend.
Thanks.
Thank you.